minus, oh shoot. Hi, everyone. If everyone can sign in as we're waiting just for a few more people to join us. You can do your attendance by. Great. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I want to make sure that we get started so that we have some time for planning purposes at the end of our time together. So if everyone can make sure that they use the sign in, I can actually try to put that in the chat if need be. Just give me 1 second. One second. Hopefully that worked for the chat. Let me know if it didn't work. So we're all just signing in and we will get started. Great. So as we're coming together, I wanted to give us an opportunity to share in the chat something that you feel is a big win from your classroom this year. Could be just from even the last month of you teaching Number Worlds, or share in the chat something you're proud of your Number Worlds classroom. Sorry, I didn't send it to everybody in the meeting. One moment, sorry. The link for the attendance is in the chat now. I apologize. Great, thanks for sharing some wins there. If you haven't had a chance to, go ahead and drop a win into the chat for us to celebrate. I already know there's wins out there other than just two. Can you share at least one other win before we move on? Great, awesome. So it looks like student growth, students applying their skills that they learn in intervention in other classrooms, and being able to also apply what they've what you've taught them in their practice outside of you being the direct instructor. That's great. So today's PD is really our, it's our last, oh, there's one more, sorry about that. Awesome, independently navigating the Numberworlds website. That's a huge win because that's a skill that we need our students to be able to do in order for us to be teaching more than one level at a time, and also just increase their independence on the computer. It's wonderful. So today's PD is our last PD as a central, like a time where we're going to be joined together this school year as Numberworlds teachers from across the network. So our plan is to really focus on some of the areas that people responded to in the survey in regards to what they needed most, what they found would be most beneficial in the next hour to work on. As you can see here, a big trend is time to share ideas on how to adjust instruction, and also just overall time to plan and think through how can each of us end this year strong, knowing that we want to find an opportunity to finish at least one level of Numberworlds, if that's our end goal in the school year. So like, how can we maximize our daily lesson planning, and also how can we have some time just to talk, plan, and figure out how we're going to accomplish that goal. So today is really focused on a few refreshers for some of us that have been in previous PD sessions together with Numberworlds, and then really with some time to share. And then a big chunk of our time today will be to go off and use the time that you need to plan out your instruction for the rest of the school year, like big picture wise. I also just want to say thank you to those that did fill out the survey. It was helpful to know what people need, because obviously we're all teaching in different schools across the network. So thank you for those of you that filled it out. And I hope that if you weren't able to, that any questions that you do have, you can share today so that we can share as a group and as a collective to figure out answers for each other. Sorry, this just jumped like 10 screens. Here we go. All right, so we're going to jump right in with just the first question, and focus area was around adjusting instruction. And then, as you see, we're going to move quickly through daily lesson planning, making decisions to move within Numberworlds levels, and then the rest of the time will be spent planning. So you wanted to start off with just a quick scenario. Pretend maybe it's you, maybe this has been you. It was a scenario that was brought up through the survey, is that you've just given your students the Level E Unit 3 Week 4 assessment, and on that assessment you were teaching students how to solve addition problems within 1,000. You've 7 students in this said Level E class. 2 of the students scored an 80% or higher on that assessment. The other 5 students scored below 70%. What would you suggest? And some things to consider for those of us that haven't taught this level is that Week 4 teaches students how to fluently add and subtract within 1,000 using both place value, algorithms, as well as the idea of the operation that addition and subtraction are related. And in this class, so you have Level E, you teach 30 minutes, sorry, of your Level E group, and then they go and do independent work and building blocks, and then you teach another Level E group. So what would you recommend for someone? How can they adjust that instruction? You can take yourself off mute and share some ideas because it's kind of hard to wait for everyone to chat.
I would say reteach the 5 students who scored below 70, while the other 2 students do like a push lesson to push their skills, probably some easy word problems, whereas though they had to just identify if it's an addition word problem and use the computation skill that they learned, while you're at the front teaching the other 5, doing a reteach lesson with the other 5 who scored below 70.
Great. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And does anyone have any other ideas?
I've
In
kind
addition.
of done the same thing that I think that was Mr. Sutton just shared. I've utilized iReady in moments like this. So what I've done is, like, if the students have passed that lesson, I kind of try to find the next skill that we're going to work on and have them do an iReady lesson on that skill to kind of preview the next step while I reteach the lesson with the students that didn't get it.
I just wanted to add also, I think what Dom and Mr. Sutton said are great. I've also utilized like peer tutors. So those students who have mastered the content, like splitting, I mean, my small group is like on the larger side, but like even just splitting it up a little more. So having the like peer tutors also supporting those students who may not have mastered all of that content on the weekly assessment.
Thanks. So it sounds like we definitely all agree that we wouldn't want to just push forward necessarily with that whole group, because at least 5 of your 7 students didn't meet the 80% or get really close to 80%. Because sometimes on a test, if they're at 78%, you're like, okay, I know that they know this. I just need to review it in a different way through, and I can move on. But if you've got a lot of students that just aren't hitting close to or at 80%, there's many ways to reteach, such as what we just said, using the other students to be peer tutors, giving the other students another act. So the students that did pass it, they could do other activities like Mr. Sutton said, and Dom said as well. Other ways you can use within Number Worlds, you could have the other students work on, even though they mastered that concept, the extra practice pages that you might not have given them from Number World. So you don't even have to go look for additional work. You could just go get the extra practice pages for that lesson or those lessons that you just taught, and give that as enrichment. And then maybe they do an extra word problem a day or something like that, so that you're not creating stuff from scratch, to be able to then focus really on your reteach. And for instance, in this level E group, perhaps you don't have to reteach the entire week's concepts. Maybe it was just that they understood, they understood place value, but they didn't understand the relationship of addition and subtraction. So really just using the test to identify, like, what is the big idea that is missing, or that students have not yet mastered, and then finding ways to reteach it, such as we just suggested. Other areas you can do is creating a new warm-up for the next couple of lessons that is going to drill that, reiterate that concept, redoing reflect questions, such as that are already in the lesson plan that you didn't get to, using them to be your driving force of your lessons, extra practice pages, as well as you could even use the differentiation page, the differentiation or support practice that is given to you in the engage section of the lesson plans. So you don't necessarily, I would suggest not trying to recreate the wheel and recreate questions, because there are resources that you might not have hit upon in the lesson that when you taught it the couple days prior to the assessment. So if you're feeling like you are recreating the wheel every time you have to reteach, just take a moment and step back and think about what other things or what other resources are already available in Number Worlds, because you don't want to have to sit there and create curriculum on your own. Great. This is just reconfirming what we were just saying, that we want to make sure that our students are at 80% or very close to it before we move on. There might be a case where there's one student that isn't at that 80%. You can make that decision as your teacher as, okay, I understand that this student needs a little bit more repetition. As we move to the next lesson, I'm going to find ways to incorporate possibly a different warm up for that student, or they go back and they do a
So it's
practice.
80%, so we don't have. They can't hear me.
Sorry, did you have a question? Oh. So 80% is the goal for our students to be proficient in order to move on. If a student's at 78 or 79%, and you're looking at the data, you're like physically looking at the test, of course, like you make that decision to move on. But if you have a student, one of your students is 70%, like, you know, not mastering it, but you don't want to hold the rest of the group back, there's ways to adjust the instruction for that student as you move forward. Does that make sense? Is that, I mean, I personally have had that experience. Has anybody else had that experience where they've had to move on, but know that there's a student that just needs extra practice in different ways? Okay, cool. Great. All right, so we just wanted to refresh and talk about, there was a question in regards to daily lesson planning and what to prioritize. Many of us have more than one group of students that they're teaching at a time for Number World. So you might have 60 minutes and you're teaching a group of students that some need level E unit 2, others need level E unit 4. So that's what we, someone asked, and if hopefully this resonates with some others. If not, thank you for being patient, just listening in and sharing any ideas that you do have. When you have considered having, when you have had the opportunity to teach two groups of students at the same time, like within a block, what are some areas that are, what are things, what are some things that you would suggest somebody to consider if they were about to teach a group of students in a 60-minute period and they know that they're not all on the same level and they're going to hopefully teach two different levels? What are some areas, put in the chat, what are some things that as a teacher you want to consider beforehand?
Chris, I'm so sorry. Can you rephrase that question? I didn't hear it.
Sorry. If for someone that is either just starting out or is struggling to teach more than one level of Number Worlds in a given period, a class period, what are some teacher moves that you'd want to suggest that people consider? For instance, like maybe you want to consider the space in your room. Like what are some things we want to consider if we're going to be running two different groups within a 60-minute? If people could just share in the chat some things to consider. Awesome. Great. Great. So it sounds like we're on the same page. So for those of us that are just starting out with the idea of having two different levels running at the same time, or maybe you're doing it, but you just want a refresher of ideas that you can do, in the chat here, there's some great ideas of just making sure you're considering what your rotations are going to look like, as well as what are physically the students going to be working on. And so there's many different scenarios that each of us have in our classrooms. Some of us might have all students that are working on the same level, the same unit, but you can easily differentiate students that are mastering concepts at a different pace and they can move a little bit faster. And that's how you would divide your groups up. Some of us are working with students that their IEP goals, as well as their progress on the different assessments, are showing us that they need place value instruction, and that's where they need to be working within the unit. But then there's some students that are ready for multiplication, and that's what they're going to be working on unit 3 or 4, just hypothetically. So we can consider our students' needs and in big buckets rather than like very specific and individualized. It's going to be really hard to teach to everyone's specific needs, but grouping your students into 2 big groups, it will help you. And consider like the time that you have within your class. That we just were suggesting, like some people said, the different activities that you're going to do. You're also going to want to consider like what level are the students at. So you don't have to just like ballpark it. You can use pre-level assessments or post-level assessments from the previous unit to be able to back yourself in your decision-making in regards to how you're grouping your students. And then with all this said, you want to make sure that you're still focusing on like what routines you need to set up or reset up if you've been doing this and you're noticing that you're not getting to your second group, like using timers or perhaps giving students more jobs so that you're able to quickly switch from one lesson and then the next group comes over. And access to computers, because one of the areas that students can be working independently is you could assign them building blocks within Number Worlds to be working on independently. That could be part of their routine that they're working on their practice problems independent of you, as well as then going into building blocks or going into an assignment that you've given them on iReady that's aligned to it. And we already said this, but we just want to make sure that when you are planning for that daily lesson, you're just trying, if you're making groups, you want to just commit to 2 groups. You're not going to be able to do more than 2. So once you've decided what your groups are, a lot of us are still struggling, myself included, in like, what do I prioritize? I only have like 25 minutes right now because of with transitions to teach my group of students before they go off to do independent practice. And this is definitely something that a lot of us already know, but in the moment you get really, you can forget and feel like there's a lot to teach a student within that time, the students within that time period. So just remember that the biggest area that you want to focus on, no matter if you have, obviously they give you 45 minutes, 60-minute or 30-minute periods, class periods, is the engage. The engage is your key. So if you have 30 minutes or less because of your rotations with the students, you really are just working on your engage. The warm up is wonderful, but you don't have time for that. So you want to focus on making sure there's the engage so that then the students can move on to practice on their own and you could check their work later. Or you could have them be working on their practice from the day before, and then they bring it to your group. If they're the second rotation, they bring you what they worked on from the day before, and you can take a look at it as you're working with the students. So if you do have a full 60 minutes for only one group of students, you're not teaching more than one rotation, then that's when you can really focus on the full lesson. And that is, some of us do have that, but if you are at 30 minutes per rotation, you just want to make sure that you hit that heart of the lesson, which is the engage.
Hey, I'm sorry, I did have some information I wanted to ask about this. So it doesn't, so as long as we just hit the engage, we should be okay if we don't hit the warm up or the worksheets as well?
How much time do you have for your students?
So I have about 30 to 45 minutes depending on behaviors with my kids, but I have 3 rotations. And my API told me to stick to the 30.
Okay, I was gonna say,
But-
depending, sorry, go ahead.
So because one of the things I kept on getting tripped up on, like, okay, I don't have enough time to do the worksheets, the warm up, and the engage and the building blocks. And so we actually worked it where the building blocks could be as a way for a responsive block where they can do that on their own with another teacher,
Mhm.
but not on their own, because a lot of my kids can't do anything on their own. They do need a lot of hands-on. But I was concerned not being able to get to what they need. So the engage, if they can just do the engage then that would be perfectly fine as long as they do that. That's the question I'm asking.
The engage with the student workbook practice. So like if, because the student workbook is involved with the engage piece. So you'd want to make sure that if you only have 30 minutes and they don't have any time to be independent of you, then you want to cut the engage part, or sorry, the card, the activity card. Technically the engage of Number Worlds includes the practice, but you might not have time in 30 minutes. Do the students, the 30 to 40 minutes, do the students have any time outside of work, like they're in the same room as you, but and working independent?
No, well, we have a responsive block where they can work independent with a teacher, which is okay. But even during that time, it's not just my work they could be
Okay.
dealing with. It's also maybe they can work on, they could be working on also reading work as well.
Okay.
So I'll try to see if I can push that in there, the building blocks in there, but she's
Gotcha.
not gonna be able to, or like I'm the main teacher from Number World. She's not teaching like the other part to
Yeah.
my lesson.
Okay, then I would say then that in your 30 to 40 minutes that you have, yes, you want to do the activity card and give the students some time to practice. Maybe it's only 5 minutes some days, maybe it's 10 to 15 the next day, but your focus you don't need to worry about the warm up and the assess at the end, like the reflect questions and stuff. You won't have really time for that. There might be some days where you can, because depending on what it is you're teaching, but your focus really should be on that engage, because that's the direct instruction, and then giving them either practice through the questions that they ask on the activity card, or so if it's a game that you're playing through engage, like that could become your practice, but you want to have some hands-on independent practice that the students get within that 30 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Mhm. And that means too, that you'll have a lot of things that when you do need to reteach that you didn't use, so you could easily go back and use that. If we're only focusing on the activity card and the practice, you'll have more opportunities for reteach, because there's all the, you could use the supported practice, you could use the warm-ups if you need to reteach. So that's what's pretty good about not having to get every point of the daily lesson completed if you don't have the 60 minutes. And these are obviously in the teacher guides as well as online. So if you ever wanted to go back and take a look at those like different parameters that they lined up for us already in Number Worlds, but big focus is that engage. And this was just a reminder of the key, we already mentioned this, building blocks can be used during independent practice time, or if you need to reteach, you can use that supported practice portion of the lesson. You can also use it in the lesson if you're noticing kids are not getting what you're teaching, like make that choice to let me go and use the supported part before I move on further to independent. I'd love to take this opportunity to just take a quick pause before we move into the almost the end of our sessions to get today. But is there any questions that you have that you'd like to ask? You can either put them in the chat for the group, or feel free to take yourself off mute and ask them. All right. No questions, we'll just keep on going. There was one other question that did come up in the pre-PD survey questionnaire, was that what other practice questions and exercises do teachers assign when they feel there is a need for more practice outside of the Number Worlds lessons? And how about fluency routines? We've kind of touched upon this already just for the nature of the conversation, but what Number Worlds, like already existing resources, might you consider if you need extra practice so that you don't have to recreate or go look for something outside of the curriculum? Great. So someone just said that you could use those extra practice worksheets. Some people have used, if you aren't doing the warm-ups, because those are more fluency based and cognitive, you could easily implement, go back and look at the other warm-up questions that you just haven't gotten to because that's not a part of your lesson structure because of time. So you can use them to be able to get kids to conceptually be able to either skip count or be able to add quickly, find, depending on what you're teaching. So the warm-ups, some others that I know I've heard other people have used are, if you haven't taught like on, how each week that when you give an assessment, there's also like the week 5, the day 5 has like review questions. If you're not going to be able to use them, when you could always have kids, because they break it down by the lesson, lesson 1 for that week is couple extra questions you could use for students to have. As far as fluency routines, I'm sure folks have some ideas, but you could always implement fluency routines that our peers are using in math classes in Eureka, if that's something you're looking for. I know a lot of us don't necessarily have a lot of time, but there are some teachers that have a lot of time when they're teaching number worlds, so they might be looking for extra. And I think the big thing would be, I'd suggest, is at least using what you have from number worlds first before you start trying to put in additional worksheets and stuff, because then you're going to find yourself creating curriculum and searching high and low for stuff that maybe is already there. And as far as fluency routines, I don't know, does anyone use fluency routines in their group? Want to share what they do or where they've gotten their fluency routines from?
Sometimes if I have a lesson that I get through quicker with students, or like if I'm doing rotations and I have a group that gets through it quickly, I will take the fluency worksheets from their Eureka teacher, because they do a lot of spiral in Eureka, and they'll work on that independently, because it just gives them the chance to work on like their multiplication or their addition. And I've seen like students really just, when they're done their work, they grab the worksheet and they just do it independently and jump into it.
Thanks. All right. Our last push before we get some time to go off and do some planning on our own is just the big idea of what kind of decisions are we making, and in regards to the curriculum, like how are we deciding what to teach within the level that we're working on with our students or teaching with our students, and also like what freedom do we have to move up a level or to move back and reteach if needed. So our end goal obviously is to teach our students so that they don't need our intervention, right? So if our end goal is to help our students grow closer to their grade level of competency, depending on whatever skill set that they are coming to us with, we want to make sure that also our end goal in our yearly school year is that we're finishing at least one level of number worlds. Like, we don't want our students to be stuck in a level that year after year. So if our end goal is that they're finishing a level of number worlds within a school year, like what needs to be true? And that's the big idea. Like, so we need to make sure that we feel comfortable with the fact that we don't need to teach the number worlds units in a linear fashion. So just because our students are they're participating in our level E class at this said time, if all of our students don't need the first unit of level E or the third unit of level E, then we don't need to teach it. You can easily move up a level for that level E, because as you know, each level builds on each other. So if you're teaching level E and you know that the students are really ready for I don't teach level E, so I'm just like, I don't remember what exactly is on that, but multiplication at the next level, they don't need the level E multiplication, but they need the level F multiplication, then teach them that level F unit. And then you come back to level E because that's what they need. The idea is that then we're sharing this information with each other and our students' parents, so that then the next year, when they are in level F, they don't need to take that that course, that unit again, because they've mastered it. So the way we can use number worlds and should be using number worlds is not necessarily like you're prescribed to start at unit 1 and move all the way through if that's not what you need. And just that also being said, if you have a group of students that you're working with and you get to the measurement and data unit and you know they don't have the prerequisite skills of the level below, then go back and teach them some of the lessons from the level below. We have the freedom to be flexible there. This is just a reminder, I should have this up before when I was explaining that more, but each level is going to have similar content strands. So you can easily identify like, oh, they're struggling here. Let me move back and look at what they did, what they would have done in level D so that I can make sure I'm filling in the gaps. Or let me move forward with, if you're in level E and they're getting addition and subtraction, then maybe you're jumping right to the unit 4 multiplication division, because that's what you know that they need. And you don't have to make these decisions just off the top of your head. You can definitely and should, I suggest, keep using you give the level test, give unit pre-tests. If students are mastering of the pre-tests, and that's the majority of your students, then you can move on. You don't need to teach something that the kids are already getting. And some of us were asking in the questionnaire ahead of time, like, well, how do I get familiar with the other levels? And to be honest, that's something that you need time to do. Like, I mean, I personally haven't had a chance to do it, but some ways you can do it is most of us, I believe, and I could be wrong, but some of us have access to the other levels teacher editions online. So you could always look there. And in the teacher edition of the current level that you're using, whether it's online or the book, has at the back of it has every level of number worlds, like the scope and sequence. So you can easily take a look there just to get a ballpark of like, well, what are they teaching in the next level, or what should they have known from the previous level that maybe I need to go back and find a lesson or couple weeks lessons from that unit to teach. Just curious, does everybody use the pre-tests, like the pre-level tests and also the or not, you don't have to, I don't call it. Does anybody have any questions about how to use the pre-level assessments and the pre-unit tests or post-unit tests? And something to consider would be if you haven't been giving those pre-level tests, if you didn't give the pre-level test, maybe you're halfway, we're in February of the school year. Possibly right now, you would, in the time that you have to plan, you would think about, okay, I haven't given the pre-unit test for the unit I'm teaching right now, and also for the unit or the unit I'm about to teach. So plan time this year to try to start giving that pre-unit test and post-unit test, just so you can get an idea of whether or not the next unit is even something you need to teach your students. And this is just a visual of what it looks like in the back of your book. You can take a look at if you have the hard copy, and even if you're online, it's the same, it's there too. So you can look at other grades, other levels of number worlds and what they're teaching. Great. All right, so we're at the end, and really want to just make sure that anyone that has any other questions has a chance to ask them, and then we will really be sent off in a few moments to take some time to plan out. I'll explain a little bit more how you might want to consider your planning time today, because obviously it's up to you. But if anybody has any other questions before we move on, I'd love for you to take yourself off mute or put it in the chat. Okay.
This isn't a question, Chris, but
Okay,
thank
yeah.
you for reminding me. So like I have a level E group right now, and we're kind of like towards the level E.
Mhm.
And we just like finished multiplication and division, and we're doing area, but the area lessons are coming like somewhat on the easier side for them. So thank you for reminding me that I could always pull from like level F to like give them that little challenge piece.
Yeah,
So not a question, but just
Yeah.
thank you for that reminder.
yeah. And the great thing will be too, is then next year, if they are still in Number World, no matter if they're, whoever, they'll be able to, we'll be able to share that information that they won't need that unit if you've taught it and they've mastered it. So it's not, because really our end goal is to catch our kids up. So it's whatever
Exactly.
pace we want to, like, we want to move at the pace of what our students are telling us. We don't want to put them through stuff that they don't need to be working on.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Great. So if you're anyone like myself, I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, like, all right, what am I spending my time planning? Well, the big focus would be if we have the next few months of the school year, and possibly you have a situation such as Kelly just shared, like where you know that you want to go to the next level for a certain unit that you're working on. This would be the time to take a look at that next unit, and or take a look at the scope and sequence of even just the level that you're teaching right now, because sometimes we don't have that opportunity to look forward and know, like, where am I going with all of this? So the idea would be is after we leave our session today, is everyone takes some time to think about what would need to be true for you and your students in order for you to finish one level or even start a next level with students, so that the idea is that we're really getting them closer and closer to no longer needing our lovely support. We love teaching our students, but we don't want to hold our students just so that we keep teaching them. We want them to grow their skills. I do have a template that I was going to share with everybody that you can use if you'd like to. It's a Google document. I'll put it in the chat in a moment. You can just make a copy of it. It's just a calendar, but make a copy, because if you start typing in it, it'll change it for everyone. Maybe you're someone that likes to plan just in your lesson plan book. That's cool too. There's no requirement of this planning time. It's just the idea is to consider like what time you do have left with your students this report period, as well as when spring break is going to come, then when state testing may fall, depending on the grade level that you teach. And then like RP4 is in there too, with and like ending the school in June, like when you're probably not going to be able to get to Number Worlds at the first week of June as we finish up school. So really just considering like, how much time do I have left with my students, even though it is only February, what's my big goal, and try to just at least mark out how many, what you want to make sure you're targeting in your instruction. But also if you're someone that you're like, I'm not sure if I'm going to get to all these units, I'm going to then plan to give some pre-tests now or in the next few weeks, so that I know I might not need to do this unit, but I'm going to move to the next unit after, so that students can have hopefully finished an entire level in a year. So I will, again, everyone plans differently. You do not need to use this document if it's not helpful to you. I will put it in the chat in a moment, and you'll be able to hopefully use it if that's how you seem fit. One last question before we move on to lesson planning, and is that someone asked, how do you print out lessons from Number Worlds online? And I agree, it's really difficult because it comes out really small. So what I suggest and what we do here at Thomas Elementary is that if we only have one teacher's guide, you just take it to the photocopy machine, and as annoying as it is, you make that one copy. You can make a copy, you do it at 80%. I learned, because when I was trying to do it at like the regular 100%, it was way too, it didn't fit in the page. But if you hit 80% and photocopy for lesson plans, if you're sharing lesson plan books, because it is hard to transfer or to print it from online. I'm pretty sure it's probably because of copyright rules and stuff like that. But. Awesome. All right, so if everyone can do the survey, and then I will share in the link in the chat as well the link for the calendar that you can use if you would like to. And I just appreciate everybody coming and your questions and your suggestions that for those of you that had them, thank you. And again, if there's any other questions, please feel free to ask them now so that we can all help you. I'll put this in the chat for you. Here's the link to the survey. And here is also the next link is the Google Doc that you can just make a copy of on your page. I'm sorry, on your drive if you'd like to use it to help you plan. And once you fill out the survey, feel free to head off to plan and work on your focus for what you want to achieve for your Number Worlds groups. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, no problem.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It's not the survey?
It's not if you're looking for email.
No?
You put it in other. I'll get it.
Huh?